Sandra and Tom Garner were the kind of couple everyone in Mayfield thought they understood: quiet, routine, and harmless. But just days after Tom was found murdered in their bedroom, and Sandra claimed a masked man was to blame, investigators began to suspect a far more chilling possibility: that behind the calm facade of their marriage lay secrets, manipulation, and a deadly plan crafted from within. Mayfield, Texas, was a town where people left their doors unlocked and waved to neighbors from their front porches. It was the kind of place where gossip traveled faster than the wind. But real crime almost never knocked on anyone's door. People liked it that way. They liked knowing their routines would never be interrupted. 4 years. That had been true until the night everything changed at the small white house on Oak Ridge Lane. Sandra and Tom Garner were not flashy people. They lived a modest life in a one-story home with faded green shutters and a well-kept yard. Tom had taught high school math for over 30 years before retiring, just 2 years earlier. He was known around town for being sharp-minded, a little strict, and always punctual. Sandra worked quietly from home, doing bookkeeping for small businesses around town. They had no children living at home, no wild parties, and no signs of trouble to anyone looking from the outside. The Garners were just another quiet couple growing old together. But behind that quiet image, there were cracks. Some neighbors whispered that Tom was controlling. Others said Sandra looked more tired than usual in the months before the incident. No one had ever seen them argue publicly, but those who lived closest to them had noticed small, strange things. A porch light that stayed on all night for weeks. Tom sitting alone in his truck in the driveway long after coming home, and Sandra often pacing in the backyard just before dark. These were passing observations at the time, things no one thought worth mentioning. Later, they would become chilling details in a much darker picture. On January 3rd, just after 2 in the morning, a 911 call shattered the quiet of Mayfield. Sandra's voice, barely steady, reported that her husband had been shot. When officers arrived minutes later, they found her sitting on the bedroom floor, pale and shaking. Tom lay in bed, unmoving. A single gunshot wound to his chest had ended his life instantly. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. Everything in the house was exactly where it belonged, except for Tom. Paramedics declared him dead at the scene. Police began combing through the house immediately, expecting to find some evidence of an intruder. But the windows were locked from the inside. The doors showed no signs of forced entry. The only unusual item was a flashlight found on the floor near the bed. Sandra said she had woken up to the sound of a struggle and seen a masked man flee in the room. She claimed he had dropped the flashlight but escaped before she could scream. Investigators were skeptical. Nothing was stolen. There was no indication anyone had broken in or even attempted to. The flashlight itself was common, no fingerprints, no identifying mark. Sandra's story didn't match the calm, undisturbed crime scene. And as the sun rose over Mayfield that morning, one thing was clear. Something about Tom Garner's death didn't make sense, and the peaceful town would never be the same again. As detectives began piecing together the night of Tom Garner's death, one detail stood out immediately. There was no weapon at the scene. It was an odd detail for a shooting inside a locked house. Tom had been killed in bed with a single shot to the chest, and yet the gun was nowhere to be found. Investigators knew that if Sandra's story about an intruder was true, the killer had taken the gun with them when they left. But that didn't explain how someone could escape a locked house without leaving any trace. Officers scoured every inch of the home, searching for clues that might suggest forced entry or an escape route. The windows were sealed tight. The doors showed no signs of tampering. Nothing had been stolen, no electronics, no cash, no jewelry. Sandra's purse still sat on the kitchen counter, untouched. It didn't look like a burglary. It looked like someone had entered the house, gone straight to the bedroom, killed Tom, and vanished without a trace. A single muddy footprint was discovered near the kitchen door, leading from the hallway. It seemed like a lead until investigators noticed the floor beyond it was perfectly clean. No continuation of prints, no smears, No trail leading outside, almost like someone had placed a single shoe print there deliberately. Forensics took photos and samples, but the footprint turned out to be unhelpful. No unique wear, just an isolated, suspicious clue in an otherwise undisturbed crime scene. The next step was canvassing the neighborhood. Officers knocked on doors, hoping someone had seen or heard anything strange that night. A few neighbors reported seeing flashing lights from emergency vehicles after the fact, but no one saw a masked man, no one heard a gunshot, and no one saw anything suspicious in the hours before the murder. It was like the alleged intruder had never existed. With nothing adding up, investigators widened their search to the property outside. The backyard included a small pond, which had always been more decorative than functional. Detectives ordered it to be drained. 3 days after the murder, workers pulled out buckets of murky water and debris. And then they found it. A revolver wrapped in 2 layers of plastic bags, weighed down with rocks, and sealed with duct tape. Ballistics testing confirmed the weapon was a .38 caliber revolver. It was the same caliber as the bullet found in Tom's chest. Even more damning, the serial number on the gun matched a weapon that had once been registered to Tom himself. He had reported it stolen nearly 5 years earlier. Though no report was ever officially filed with police, the weapon had simply vanished from their home, and now it had returned. The gun was carefully examined. It had been wiped clean, but under the layers of tape on the grip, a partial fingerprint was recovered. Unfortunately, it wasn't clear enough to match to anyone in the system, not even Sandra. Still, the evidence raised questions. If Sandra had nothing to hide, how did the murder weapon end up in her pond? Why hadn't she mentioned the missing gun? And if there was a killer on the loose, why didn't they take the weapon with them? The discovery deepened the mystery. Instead of pointing clearly to an outside attacker, the gun's reappearance suggested the crime may have stayed much closer to home.